If you want to see virtue, first you must calm your mind. If you want something, you lose everything, so you have nothing. If you have nothing, your mind is already calm, and then you can see virtue. So, how do we want properly? I didn't make up those words. It's part of the preface that Ed Brown, who's a Zen teacher in the San Francisco lineage, who was in charge of the kitchen when I visited in 1974, he wrote the Tassajara bread book and Tassajara cooking. And then he wrote the preface of the introduction to a translation uh, uh, by somebody Leighton. There's a Zen master, and I don't remember his first name, but he co-translated Dogen's instructions on how to live together in community. And I thought, oh, that sounds worth buying. So when I was looking through Amazon, it gives you some free pages. And those words come from Suzuki Roshi. Uh, Ed Brown, when he was in charge of the kitchen, would ask Suzuki Roshi for guidance on a periodic basis. And Suzuki Roshi's only guidance is when you chop vegetables, just chop vegetables. When you clean the dishes, just clean the dishes. And he found that useful, so he didn't ask any further, except that he would ask every month or so and get the same guidance. And that seemed to help him with his physical labor. But he had other labor. And the other labor was he was in charge of the kitchen crew, who naturally were an ornery bunch. And their being an ornery bunch disturbed his peace of mind. And he didn't know how to practice with that. So he brought that to Suzuki Roshi. And he says, I would be fine except for this ornery bunch. How do I pacify the ornery bunch was kind of his question. And Suzuki Roshi's response was, if you want to see virtue, you must calm your mind. So if you want to see virtue, you must calm your mind has a number of different parts that all point to mind, but they also point away if you don't know how to look. Want, see, virtue, must, calm, mind. I want somebody who I know to write me a calligraphy that says that. I have some friends I want to give it to. Uh, want means want what? Because Zen Master Sung Sang taught, if you want something, you get something, but you lose everything. So don't make anything, then you get everything. My counter perspective on that is we are human beings. We want something. So be careful what you want and take good care of it, because we're always making something. But those aren't two separate teachings, because they both point to mind. So be careful how you want. First teaching. See also has meaning in one direction, meaning in another direction. See often means subject, object. I see you, right? I see dinner. I see an ornery kitchen crew who are disturbing my peace of mind. So subject, object is how we normally see seeing. There's a seer and there's a thing that's seen. Other seeing means just seeing is Buddha nature. Just seeing has no subject or object, And because there's no subject or object, each mind moment is crystal clear. Even if it's puzzling, then it's crystal clear that we're puzzled. So you can't escape choicelessness. So seeing something and just seeing, which helps you the most? Virtue also one side, the other side. Virtue, when we think of it as a quality, then it's either possessed or not possessed in us or somebody else. So if you're looking for a thing, then you only look for that thing and we miss everything else. And I wonder, is that virtuous? If virtue is how our fundamental nature manifests in this space, then everybody has that. In a tree, it's brown and green. In the ocean, it's wet. In my obnoxious kitchen staff, it's an obnoxious kitchen staff. Do they also not have Buddha nature? If you're looking for a thing, you won't see it. If you know seeing without subject object, then you see everybody's virtue naturally, because there's no hindrance to that. Want, see, virtue, must. Must has subject object or no subject, no object. Must often has to do with I'm not doing something and I should, but I'm not, so I have to strive for it or else I'm deficient and I lack something. Or it's a directive you're giving to somebody else. You lack something, so you must do this so you don't lack it anymore, so you'll stop bothering me. Other kind of must means choicelessness. Choicelessness, Barry Briggs Jito Popsini, one of my Dharma brothers, uh, has come to appreciate this phrase. It could be, it couldn't be otherwise. He has some very serious medical conditions that have to do with something that he's tending to, but it's about being 70 years old and having an injury in the spine when he was 19. So that creates a lot of problems in your 70s, and that creates a mind posture that reacts to the physical and mental difficulties that accompany that. And the most helpful point of view that he's found is it couldn't be otherwise. And that removes the obstacles that happen in the mind posture that reacts to the body posture. Because originally mind posture has nothing. And as I might have mentioned last week, I myself, speaking for myself, my only responsibility is to tend well to my posture of mind, and I don't have the right to expect anything from anybody else, from one point of view. And that's Barry's way of saying it. And seeing that is seeing what you must do, because there's no choice. Want, see, virtue, must, calm. Calm has one perspective, another perspective, as all of these teaching words do. One perspective is that which is not disturbed is calm. So we want that because we feel better when we're calm, and we act better when we're calm, and we're more virtuous, so we get along better with other people, and I don't disturb myself as much, and therefore you don't disturb me as much, and maybe I don't disturb you as much, and I have more access to my energy, as I realized from having seen what I said a minute ago, and Barry realized by seeing it could not be otherwise. But calm also is generated through the world of opposites. calm brings forth not calm, which means I want, I don't want. And even though I wish for all of us more calm than not calm, still that kind of calm isn't calm. That's just the absence of disturbance. And of course, because circumstances appear moment to moment, then some circumstances are less favorable than others. And if we only understand the opposite kind of calm, then unfavorable circumstances naturally disturb our peace of mind. Our fundamental nature has no inherent quality, so the issue of calm or disturbed has nothing to do with it. It is what it is. And therefore, to see that is to see what you must see, is to recognize that each mind moment is inherently calm in a particular way, and there's a virtue to that. Want, see, virtue, must, calm, mind. The Huayan school, the mind alone school, says mind makes everything. Zen Master Sung San, quoting that to Stan Lombardo and Judy Roitman when he was leaving their house and they were talking about something that they had just seen that was clear for them about practice, his response was, mind makes everything, so what makes mind? Then he got in the car and drove off, because he's a hit and run Zen master, sometimes. So mind, no mind, also partakes of opposites. If mind makes everything, I want mind, because then I'll be enlightened and cool. And then I'll be calm and things won't disturb me, so I'll be virtuous and people will bow to me. That's how Musang Sanim jokes around, by the way. I didn't make that up. But mind has no inherent quality, and therefore just seeing is Buddha nature. So if you don't have some idea of mind, then mind permeates all moments everywhere, and where you are, that's you. And you're the only one who can see things from where you stand. So tend to that space well. That's the teaching of, if you want to see virtue, you must calm your mind. Point number 1. Point number 2. When Lin Chi was practicing with Huang Po, he had much potential, even as a new student, that was visible to the more mature students around him and maybe other people. But he never went to see Huang Po. So the head monastic there asked him, why do you never ask a question to the master? Because in monasteries in those times, you only went to see the Zen master if you had something that you either wanted to present or you needed to ask about. They didn't have interviews like we do. In fact, traditional Korean Buddhism still follows that. He said, I don't know what to ask him. So he said, well, go ask him what is Buddha. So he goes to Huang Po and he says, what is Buddha? And Huang Po hits him and he leaves. And he goes back to the head monk and he says, how was it? And the head monk says, Lin Chi says, I asked him what is Buddha and he hit me. I don't understand my mistake. And the head monk says, then you should go ask him again. So he goes back and he says, Master, I don't understand my mistake. And Huang Po hits him again. No, he says, what is Buddha? Huang Po hits him again. So he leaves, and the head monk says, "How did it go?" And he said, "I asked him a second time, and he hit me a second time. I still don't understand my mistake." So the head monk says, "You should go ask him again." He goes to ask him again. He says, "Master, I don't understand my mistake. What is Buddha?" And Huang Po hits him again, and he goes back and he goes to the head monk. And the head monk says, "What happened?" He said, "I asked him, 'What is Buddha?' like you said, and he hit me again, so I'm leaving." And the head monk goes to Huang Po and says, "Lin Chi uh, is a person of great potential, and he's leaving." So Huang Po says, "Tell him to go to," and I wasn't expecting to tell this story, so I don't remember who he names, but he says, "Tell him to go to this other Zen master." So being an obedient student, obviously, because he went back 3 times, that's pretty obedient, right? He's told, "Go to such and such," and Lin Chi says, "Okay, thank you," which is a funny thing to say because you might expect, "I followed your advice 3 times. Who the hell do you think you are?" And I'm not doing that, but he doesn't. There's a story that I heard a long time ago about a nun and a mother superior. The nun takes takes a vow of silence, but gets to speak once every 10 years. So the first year she says, "I'm hungry." And 10 years later she says, "I'm tired." And 10 years later she says, "I'm cold." And 10 years later she says, "I'm leaving." And the Mother Superior says, "It doesn't surprise me. All you've done since you got here is complain." So Lin Chi's like that. He goes to the other Zen master who asks him, "Where have you come from?" which means, "What's up?" If you're more mature, it means, "Show me your Dharma." But he's a novice, so he doesn't understand that. So he explains the story. "I asked Master Lin Chi 3 times, 'What is Buddha?' and he hits me 3 times. I don't understand my mistake." And the master says, "You don't understand," which if anybody thinks Zen Master Sung Song made up "you don't understand," they've been saying that for a long time. So he says, "You don't understand. Lin Chi was treating you with grandmotherly compassion." So, Huang Po was treating you with grandmotherly compassion. And Lin Chi immediately says, "There's not much to Huang Po's teaching after all." And the other Zen master says, "I don't get you, kid. First you say you don't understand why he hit you, and then you say there's not much to his teaching. What's going on with you?" So Lin Chi grabs him and punches him in the stomach. And the other master says, "That's not between you and me. That's between you and Huang Po, so go home." So he goes home, and Lin Chi goes to Huang Po. Huang Po says, "How was your visit to the other Zen master?" And Lin Chi punches him. And Huang Po says, "That's coming into the tiger's den and pulling the tiger's whiskers." So Lin Chi roars, turns around, and leaves. The reason I'm telling this, if you don't know, Lin Chi is the progenitor of one of the major traditions in our lineage that ripened in Japan into the Rinzai tradition, but in Korea it's more syncretic. So It's part of our lineage, very significant part. The part I want to point out is there's not much to Lin Chi's teaching after all. Uh, I hung around Zen Master Sung San a fair amount, and he said many valuable things, one of which is don't make anything, then you get everything. So everybody hears that, and everybody understands that, and nobody understands how to apply it to themselves as fully as they want. Although we all understand how it appears when it spontaneously appears, and like many other Zen teachings, it's useful to bring forward in your mind when you're having a complication because it returns you to your original nature at best, and at worst, it gets you over a hump. And at very, very worst, you think it's something you should be doing, so then you beat yourself up with the phrase. If you do number one and number two, that's good practice. If you do number three, shame on you, please don't. So this next part will become a book that my Dharma friend Manu and I will write. I told her the outline briefly, so I want you to visualize something, not in terms of like visualize the Bodhisattva pouring healing water all over you, but something very ordinary. First, visualize a piece of blank paper. This is very two-dimensional. So I'm presuming each of us can bring a piece of blank paper to mind. So then visualize this is mind. Now visualize a circle on the blank paper, and then underneath it says this is me. So first, you don't have anything, and now you have something. This is me has inside, outside, me, not me. Then visualize a second circle that overlaps the first circle, so you've got a Venn diagram, right? The places where they intersect in it is where there's something in common. And it's big or it's small, and sometimes only the edges touch, and sometimes they don't touch at all, so make it any way you like. And under the second circle it says, this is you. And nobody thinks to write, this is us, even in the Venn diagram. So this is me sees what's inside the Venn diagram only, and this is you sees what's in the Venn diagram only in terms of who they are to each other. And that's very productive when you're with people with whom you have a strong affinity, right? We have Zen karma together. So in the Dharma room, unless I don't like the way that somebody else is breathing or shifting, we all love each other, right? In some way or another. We're Zen students together. Good. And many other things in our life have that, because in the Venn diagram, the things we have in common please us, and they create good circumstances. So naturally we're happy. And naturally we see in the other person the things that affirm what's in the Venn diagram part. And so we're surprised if they have other qualities. But they do. If the Venn diagram is with people with whom our affinity is that we think we don't have an affinity, meaning their values disturb me and their presence disturbs me, and maybe it's for a good reason. Maybe there's something toxic about how they occupy their space, but regardless, we see it as unpleasant. And so when we look on the other side of the Venn diagram, all we see are things that confirm what we see inside the Venn diagram. And although we don't know that, what we see when we think we're looking at them on the other side of the Venn diagram is us, because that's all we can see is our own mind space. So we think we're being perceptive, but we're being deluded and convincing ourselves how clear we are, right? So when Huineng, the sixth ancestor, was asked, "Do you see or do you not see?" He said, "I both see and don't see." And the young man who asked him that said, "Huh?" That's a direct translation from the Chinese, I'm sure. And Huang Po said, "I see my faults and I don't see the faults of others." That's a useful point of view to take. That generates capacity to see virtue. If we only see my mind and your mind, that's the natural outgrowth of how we see things, is the disturbance and contention that we find in our lives. Because it eludes us at those moments that we made those things on a blank piece of paper that's mind. And then we make me and you and my mind and your mind, and it goes downhill from there. If you've ever read Flatland, you know where I'm going. If you haven't, Google it. It's a tremendously enlightening book written by a mathematician in the 15th or 16th century as a fairy tale, a mathematical fairy tale. In any case, if you see the whole piece of paper, then you perceive mind, which means you see that when you see, you don't see because there's nothing to see. And when you see there's nothing to see, then you perceive mind so naturally it could not be otherwise. And then even for the ones who are disturbing to you, you have the capacity to see virtue because you've perceived the innate calmness of mind. Not my mind, but mind's innate stability. That's the teaching part. Here's the story part. My wife is a venerable Cameroonian village auntie. If you ever have the opportunity to see one, you'll know it immediately. It feels like somebody who has a right Buddhist practice, because the village makes that happen. So I won't say more than that, but it creates a wide mind that has the same bodhisattva intention in life that we do in practicing. If you didn't know it, we're a bodhisattva generating machine, is what the Quantum School of Zen wants to be. Whether we do it or not is immaterial. That's the intention. We now, because I've become a Cameroonian village uncle, never mind the Zen master part, because there's not much to that after all. We have a sister who is she mentors special educators, and her husband is quite brilliant, and her father was also a teacher, and she has a grown daughter, a grown son, and an older teenager, third child, another son. And it's obvious to anybody who meets them that the two boys are on the spectrum. And I've known them for a long time, and Maggie's known them her whole life. And up until very recently, by which I mean a year or two ago, every time we visited them, the mother would yell upstairs, the boys would come downstairs and say, "Hi, Auntie Maggie. Hi, Uncle Ken. How are you? Give us a hug," and run back upstairs. And that was a very full conversation, no problem. Neither of these boys ever received any clinical support other than whatever the special education system they were in the school system is, which is relatively thin. It's all about how you help them learn, which I don't mean to put it down, but it's in a particular bandwidth. And Maggie and I would always kind of say essentially, what a shame. You know, there's so much more potential to be tapped because they're both quite bright in their own way in in the things that they do well. The older one is quite gifted mathematically and is good with technical things. So he started attending, he just graduated from a community college with a computer degree, some kind of IT thing. And he's quite gifted in the center of that, which means he had to learn how to drive a car and navigate his way back and forth from a classroom with the support that the community college gives him and the support his parents give him. And he's become quite fluid with that part of his life. So, starting about a year or change ago, every time we would come to the house, he would come down and say, "Hi, Auntie Maggie. Hi, Uncle Ken. How are you?" And he'd start to be more social. And then he'd go upstairs. And more recently, we'd show up and he'd either be eating dinner with his sister and brother, or he'd join us for dinner, and we'd kind of talk about dinner and kid around. And he made some fairly astute jokes. Like, he has a good sense of humor, which, like, oh, I never spent 20 minutes with him before. Then, when the parents threw a huge graduation party for the two brothers, one from high school, one from community college, he made the same kind of Cameroonian speech of gratitude that any other Cameroonian graduate makes. You couldn't tell the difference. And it's like, well, that's kind of remarkable. I'm a clinical social worker with a specialty in this realm. So I know that under certain instances, children who you think are going to be frozen in something manage to mature in surprising ways. I've seen it enough. And he's done that. Not only that, he calls me up about 5 or 6 weeks ago and says, "Uncle Ken, I'm coming to New York this weekend." And I say, "Auntie Maggie and I are going to Maryland this weekend. You might not want to do it." And he says, "Oh, no, no, I'm sorry. He didn't call us. He calls our daughter Gina, who's living with us." Many good things could be said about our daughter Gina. But she says, he said he's coming to New York, so I call his mother and say, "Tell him not to do it. We won't be here." And so he doesn't. I get a phone call at 11 o'clock this morning from a phone number I don't recognize in Maryland. "Hi, Uncle Ken." "Hi. To whom do I have the pleasure of speaking?" "Oh," and he says his name, but I don't recognize the voice. And we see much more of another young Cameroonian man who has the same name, but I know that's not his voice, so I'm very puzzled. I'm not putting it together. And Maggie's not available. She's in the middle of something. So I say, "To what do I owe this phone call?" And he says, "I'm on a bus to New York." And my first response the first time around, now, the last time I saw him, his brother had come to New York with the family a few months ago, and they went sightseeing and he loved it. And they had invited the older brother, and he said, "Wild horses couldn't drag me to New York. That's a crazy place." And it made sense to me because it doesn't match his constitution. So I'm thinking not coming to New York is the best thing that could happen to him. And now he's on a bus. And Maggie and I are going on vacation on Tuesday. And fortunately, she's not doing work on Sunday, which she normally does. So I say, "Oh, nobody told us." And he says, "I told Gina." And I'm thinking, I'm not sure how you communicated this, but Gina would have run into the room and told us if she, if she'd received the message clearly. So I said, "Okay, when you get to the bus station and you get off the bus, don't move. Call me and I'll come and find you because I'll know where you are." And he says, "Okay." Then I want Maggie to call his mother, but she's still busy because her mother's a sister to her longer than she's been a sister to me. So I figure that's your connection. But she's busy. So I decide to call the father because we're guys and that makes it my job. But I don't have his phone number, so I can't do that. I do have the mother's phone number, so I thought, well, this belongs to me. So I call her and I say, "How are you?" Because you have to start that way. You can't just get to the point. "How are you? How's the family? What's new?" She says, "Oh, my husband is in Cameroon and I'm in Ohio with my daughter. I'm in Ohio visiting my parents." And I said, "Oh, how are your parents?" Because you have to say that. I mean, I meant it, but like you can't get to the point until you've done that. "How are your parents?" "Oh, they're good." I said, "Oh, I just got a phone call from your son and he said he's on a bus to New York." And she screams, "What?" And I said, "Yeah." And I said, in the future, if he intends to come to New York, she said, "I told him to call Auntie Maggie and tell her." And I said, parenthesis, he's on the spectrum. So in the future, if he wants to come to New York, please you call your sister and find out if it's a workable weekend. Because it's not something he's very talented, but not socially in that realm, because there's a term that's other minds in that field. In fact, in the field of developmental psychology. And all it means is you know that somebody else is thinking something that you're not. That's all it means. Right? And that's not always apparent to him. And it's not apparent to his mother about him in that way. Although they're beautiful parents, I'm not criticizing anything, but I'm describing that's the lay of the land. So she said, "He told me last night I'm going to New York." And I told him, "Don't. When we come back, we'll talk about how to make a plan and I'll call Auntie Maggie." And I say, "Don't worry. I told him I'll meet him at the bus and I'll take good care of him. It's not a problem." I tell this to Maggie, and then I say, I need to find out. I don't know which bus he's on. And I want to make sure I want to make sure I go to the right place in the Port Authority, because he's not going to know how to navigate the Port Authority. That's the main bus terminal in New York. And if he just tells me, he's not going to be able to describe where he gets off in a way that's going to help me. And some parts of the Port Authority, there's no reception, so I need to know. Oh, finally I find Maggie. And I say, "Guess who phoned me?" And we're cracking up because this is really funny in a way. So she says, "Why don't you ask him to take a picture of his bus ticket and email and text it to you?" And I'm thinking that's brilliant because then I don't have to ask a question he can't answer. So he he sends me the picture and it doesn't say Greyhound or Peter Pan. And I'm thinking, holy mother of God. It says something like Tripper Bus Service. And I realize there's a bunch of discount bus services and I need to find out where they come to New York. And fortunately, that's discoverable. So I discover it's right across the street from Penn Station where the trains come. Has nothing to do with the Port Authority at all. Good to know, say I to myself, because I value these conversations. So now I know what to do. I also realize two things, at least. You guys know me, two things become five. But one is he actually did a very marvelous job in his realm. All by himself, he figured out, how do I find the most affordable bus ticket to New York that's closest to my house? How do I get there? And how do I let my family know I'm coming? Now, that's actually pretty sophisticated stuff. And why should he think anything different? Because when his family goes from Maryland to Ohio, he gets in the car with them. They show up in Ohio, and his grandparents say, it's good to see you. And we're family, so why should it be any different? Makes complete sense, right? When he says to his mother, I'm going to New York, he's not telling her, I'd like to go to New York. He's telling her, I just bought a ticket. But she doesn't know that, because when he tells her, I'm going to get a pizza, she doesn't need to know more details. He hasn't already bought the pizza, but she knows he knows how to do it. And when he says, I'm going to school now, she doesn't have to ask any more questions. So from his view, I'm going to New York. He's already told her I bought the ticket and I'll be there tomorrow. But he doesn't bother saying that because he doesn't need to. Because he doesn't know what she doesn't know. And this is new, but he doesn't think it's any different. And she doesn't know what he doesn't know, which is when you make a plan like this, before you make the plan, you have to do these things before you buy the ticket. And it's incumbent upon you to clarify that before you buy a ticket. She doesn't know that buying the ticket has happened and the conversation hasn't. So she treats this the way she'd treat anything else. It's an intention, and her job is to tell him what to do and what not to do. Makes perfect sense for her. Interesting thing in terms of the law of other minds. And because we're all Zen students, I know that you immediately see how this applies to you. And in some ways, you also immediately see that the only thing I need to be responsible for is my own mind space. Is easy, but our energy fluctuates, and the circumstances under which we make exceptions convince us that it's okay for there to be exceptions, and we don't see, wait a minute, there's no exception. If there's one hair's breadth, heaven and earth are separate. So I feel much lighter, and my energy is quite unimpeded for the past week, having seen that. So that's becoming lighter, not having an experience. You know, our tradition talks about enlightenment as if you must see something, and if you don't, you live in delusion, and when you do, you no longer do ever. Right? So there's like the ox herding pictures, and first enlightenment means you see that for an instant. and you feel that, oh, the world is very big. Second enlightenment means, oh, it happens sometimes in your life. That's good. And final enlightenment means finally it flows every place and you never go backwards. That's that's the traditional way of voicing that. And some forms of training, that's all you talk about in a way. And our school doesn't take that approach, although we use that vocabulary. It's more like what I say. You see it, it makes sense, you see it happens, and if you're fortunate, you become lighter, and what you've seen all of a sudden is clear that it's completely natural and it's always been accessible, and the posture of mind that encases you as a barrier now doesn't, and the energy flows more freely, and it's healing. And I'm not saying anything mystical. You'll see, and you already have seen. So Zen is not special means that to me. Thus have I said. So I'm still concerned, but I'm not worried, because if you look at that piece of paper, there's a saying, understand one mind, understand all minds. That's also not mystical, right? It's like I've met people who see other people's karma and describe it clearly, right? I've seen it happen where somebody who has that talent meets somebody who I know and they don't. And they tell them something about themselves that I don't know, but they do. And the person says, oh my God, that's all true. And I think, yeah, some people can do that. But now I think there's not much to Zen Master Sung San's teaching after all. Because when you see the piece of paper, you see mind makes everything but what makes mind. And then you see both of you. And so if you see one piece, it's an opening into the whole picture that you discover as you stay in the picture. If you want to step into the dream, you have to step out of the dream. If you want to step out of the dream, you have to step into the dream. So when I go to meet him, what's it was very light the whole entire time, because he's got a certain kind of brilliance. I don't mean like, the rare people who are like Einstein, not a virtuosic kind of brilliance, but there's a light and a lightness about him, and there's a child's mind living in an adult mind in the most beautiful way. We end up, I gotta feed him lunch. He's 20 something. He's just taken a 4-hour bus trip. If you don't feed him lunch, you're a bad human being, not to mention a bad uncle. So we finally discover a diner, the Malibu Diner on 23rd and 6th Avenue, 24 hours a day, Nirvana. He spends 20 minutes in menu samadhi because he's never seen this before, and he's like, wow. And we have this really interesting conversation about the menu. Like the most attractive thing are waffles with vanilla ice cream, but it's lunchtime, so he can't do that. And it's not my job to convince him that he could. He decides on chicken wings, fries, and a double thick vanilla shake with a little bit of guidance from his uncle. Oh, I already ate, so I get a bagel with cream cheese and a decaf. Good stuff. We eat when the meal comes, and we're talking about really interesting things about New York. He has some very, very astute questions about New York. So we talk about it. And part of the way through the meal, the waiter comes and I say, oh, and they bring water. Like first thing they bring water, and he looks at me like, they bring you water? Yeah. And they refill it and you don't have to ask them. It's like, oh my God, I've hit the jackpot. So then we get the coffee and he gets his double thick milkshake, which is like, it's Christmas. And I drink my coffee and he drinks his milkshake and the waiter comes by and I say, could I have a refill? And then he picks up his glass and he hands it to the waiter and says, could I have a refill too? And this makes perfect sense. It's like, Ken gets a refill, I get a refill. They give you water, they give you coffee, they give you milkshakes. This is great. This is like you go to McDonald's and you buy a cup and you get unlimited refills. Why not? So the waiter says, we don't give refills on the shakes. And I say, you do if I pay for it. So can we order another one? Uh-huh. And then I explained to him, they give you free coffee and they give you free water and tea and they don't give you free anything else, but don't worry about it. I got it covered. But that's the dharma of restaurants. And he says, oh, there's deep prajna in that. And I say, well, when you attain menu samadhi, you attain restaurant prajna, so good for you. The bodhisattva depends on restaurant prajna, by the way. So what's become very clear to me as we walk along is this is his mind space, and this is my mind space, and this is our mind space, and it's not hard to see. Now, part of the reason it's not hard to see is that he doesn't have any doors, so you don't have to open any doors. They're all already there. It's like the gateless gate. And of course, those who are ornery in the kitchen also have doors, and so does the head kitchen master, the tenzo. So then it becomes a question of what do you do about the doors, right? So Sansanin would call his mind child's mind, but he would also say Buddha's mind is child's mind. That's all he means, right? There's an unassuming freshness about it. If you had the benefit of seeing Zen Master Sung San ever, even though he was deeply perceptive, he also had a mind like that. When he came to my house for my father's funeral and stayed overnight, as he was leaving, he said, he never met either of my parents. He said, your parents, not so good relationship, yeah, is how he spoke. And I said, yeah. How did you know? He said, smell. And then he drove off. And I understood it. I also recognized I don't know how to do that. And he does. But there's nothing special about his teaching. We all do that sometimes. We just haven't learned how to do it consistently because we only see our circle on the paper and we don't see the whole paper. That's kind of all there is. So for all of us, I wish, if you want to see virtue, you must first calm your mind. So Sangha means we do that together. Thank you.